Hello there, Evie here. Welcome to the Antec AX90. There are four pillars to an AV Techie case review. We've got specification, what can the case hold, performance, how does the case perform thermally and acoustically, build quality, which is kind of obvious, and also kind of obvious installation ease. To keep the pace tight, I'll be covering specification mostly visually, so in the borders, just on the screen. I'll go over the exterior in detail, which covers the build quality, followed by the installation ease, which pretty much covers everything inside. And then we'll slot the performance in before wrapping up everything with some scores and a conclusion. So without further ado, let's get into this. The unboxing was clean and the packaging is very standard expanded polystyrene, but I'm not sure it was enough since the case didn't completely survive the shipping. I didn't notice any damage initially, but after the build, what I thought was a poorly placed mold line at the top of the front panel was actually a crack emerging and, well, has emerged. Another issue is, albeit a small one, the paint doesn't quite match the colour of the plastic. It's a touch blue and isn't well matched to my eye. Anyway, what stands out about this case is the asymmetrical front panel pattern and the inclusion of 4 ARGB fans, which look like this. Now make of that what you will, as this case will set you back around $100, or in my case I paid £80, which isn't really expensive, but it's not exactly cheap either. And there are a number of concessions made in the quality department to, as far as I'm concerned, get in all of those ARGB fans with the included ARGB controller. For reference, the fans can look like this with better lighting and camera settings, but with the room lights on and trying to present what it looks like normally looks more like this. A distinction I think is worth making. It's easy to make lights look better on camera than in real life. The website has a few things to say about this. Right off the bat, we've got a claim of excellent cooling performance, so keep that in mind for later. It also claims you can install 11 fans simultaneously, and that's actually true since they fixed the front fans outside of the chassis, which is fine, but can impact acoustic performance when you stick the face of a fan right up against a filter. Some distance is preferable. Also, if you want to replace those fans in the future, and say you've got a massive air cooler there, and you haven't got a short screwdriver or something with some sort of long neck angleable thing, it is going to be a pain in the butt to swap those fans over. The only reason they're really there is so that you don't have the chassis impeding the look of the ARGB fans. So there we go. Anyway, unless you're going mental with some water cooling or really like the look of fans, there's no reason to install 11 fans into virtually any case, but that's whatever. As for the front panel itself, I think the marketing team is stepping a little outside of its box here. Yes, the diamond-shaped mesh is providing good airflow, but it's not filtering out much dust. That's what the perforated plastic mesh is doing behind the initial front panel mesh, but that's not mentioned here. Probably because it doesn't look very good when you look at it close, or because the marketing team didn't get sent a finished product sample. If they had, they wouldn't have written something so silly. The question is, does the front panel mesh combined with the front panel filter provide good airflow? Stay tuned for the testing later. On the subject of that front filter, it's not your typical front panel filter. While there's a separate mesh internally, it's not removable to be dusted off. It's fixed in place with some melted plastic posts, or welded plastic posts. One of the many cut corners to think about. Behind the front panel, there are 3 of the 4 included ARGB fans. They are 3-pin fans, averaging at 1,095 RPM in my testing across all 4 of them, and they also have a very universal 3-pin ARGB connector. Nothing special, but I will say prior to the testing that since they are in the ballpark of 1,000 RPM fans, they are especially quiet. The built-in controller, the build-in controller is actually quite good. As it states on the webpage, it can be synced with your motherboard or just work disconnected if you can't be bothered with controlling the lighting through your board or don't have a board that can do that, like mine. It also has an off function which you can program manually by not connecting the ARGB connector to it in the first place, or just holding down the button. Finishing off the front panel, it feels pretty cheap and it packs probably one of the tougher panel removals I've encountered. It uses the most basic type of panel mechanism on the market, no hyperbole included, and it results in a very explosive panel removal as you test the waters for how hard you have to work before it gives. Moving on, there's not much to say about the glass side panel window. It's fixed to the chassis with basic thumb screws, which I prefer over the retain type, and doesn't seem to fall away uncontrollably once the screws are removed. I think that has more to do with the weight of the panel than anything else. It's a 4mm glass panel after all, which is about as thick as glass panels get on cases. To be honest, I'd prefer a 3mm panel to get some more cash invested in other areas, but that's just me. That weight comment also leads me to explain how the other side panel has the same mechanism but tends to fall off very easily, and I think weight difference is what is keeping the glass panel planted, conversely to the lighter steel panel. The eagle-eyed among you may have noticed the slither of perforations provided to the front of the side panel. I'd be skeptical about the claim of powerful cooling here just on a visual inspection alone, but I have tested this to check. It's fine. The slim perforation pattern isn't exactly providing the same massive airflow that the front panel claims to, since it's missing much of the critical free area of the fans mounted internally. I can think of some excuses for the lack of coverage, like it'll help create more airflow internally, or it's cheaper than punching out a 120mm wide strip of perforations. Actually, that's probably it. Incidentally, this means they have saved a few pennies on a slightly thinner magnetically applied mesh filter to suit. It's nice to see them spend a little on that filter at least, and the top one too, which sits next to the front I/O, with power, reset and lighting control buttons, and there's a headphone jack up there too. I certainly prefer these magnetic strip plastic mesh filters over the front one, and especially over the power supply unit filter. It really doesn't get much worse than this one. Just spend a few extra dollars on giving this a plastic frame and making it able to slide in and out without having to tip over the case to work with a very awkward bit of plastic mesh. Some people get all snarky about these kinds of criticisms, but from a design stage standpoint, it doesn't take much effort to make these things good and make the product better for all who might buy them, and maybe encourage more people to buy it. The point I'm making is it just helps overall with the feel of quality. Just the things people work with. Make those good. Things that they don't work with so much, they don't need to. Anyway, all that's left to see to the base are two positions for the internal drive cage and the feet, which have some super thin exposed slithers of foam between the foot and whatever your system rests upon. So wrapping up the exterior is the rear, which is about as basic as a rear gets for a case. The main points of note here are the crap PCI Express slot covers, all punch out with no replacements included in the parts box, and the extra headspace for the radiator clearance, which is nice from a installation point as well. If you've got big hands and you want to do a cooler change, it's actually very useful. Or just plug in the cable for the CPU power. It's also useful too. Now, that's the exterior covered in depth to give you a good idea of how this thing looks and works generally. For the interior, I'm going to limit the coverage to highs and lows to skip over the dry and boring middling stuff like how fan screws work. There are quite a few niggling issues regarding installation ease. Some good points though. The motherboard and CPU cooler installation was solid. We've got a standoff post to the center to hold the board in place, and access to the rear of the socket is nice and large. The power supply unit installation was the same, only the pads are small hard foam discs, which aren't very durable long term, but are perfectly fine if you're semi-careful, and probably won't change a power supply in the future for a very long time. The drives are a bit of a mixed bag. The 3.5-inch drive cage is fine, but it lacks some user-friendly features. For instance, you need to remove it entirely from the case to install drives to it, or replace drives, which means if you want to replace a drive or add a second drive later on, you're going to need to fish it out, which may involve a deep pain depending on your cable management. And my opinion on this is it's very easy to make this good. It doesn't need to be this basic. The two cage positions are good though, in the ballpark of 30mm difference, which is more substantial a change than many others. As for the 2.5-inch drives, they've knocked it out of the park with the most efficient solution, minus just screws to the motherboard. You screw some posts to the drive and then slot them into grommets in the chassis, which you just pop in. It's quick and simple, all positive on this front. The GPU installation is one of the biggest letdowns of this case. Not only is the case quite expensive at £80 or $100, it also dares to cost that much being equipped with snap-off PCI Express slot covers, but even worse than that, Antec doesn't even have the courtesy to provide you at least a couple of replacement covers that even the most cheapest cases on the market that do snap-off PCI Express covers do. Anyway, is this the end of the world? I haven't got a time machine to check or verify, so we'll not commit to an answer to that question. But to present the mild magnitude of this crime, let's say you're a new builder, or if you get a new motherboard, or you just didn't pay attention for the 2 seconds in your build that you were doing this part of. I've done it in the past, and I've built many computers. I'm potentially not the smartest person either. Something happens and you didn't realize you needed to leave the top slot free because your board's top slot isn't the 16x top slot you want for your graphics card. So you've snapped off the top 2 covers before you install the board, something very sensible to do. And it turns out you needed to snap off 2 and 3. All you need to do is rectify this by blocking up the top slot because you prefer a more polished look. Antec doesn't provide you with any slot covers, something that cases less than half of this include. No big deal, let's just spend $7 or £7 for the cheapest set of decent covers, or maybe more for some shipping on top of the £80 or $100 you spent on the case. You wait a few days for shipping, slot them in, and they didn't match the paintwork of the case. Just include a few Antec, your customers are paying a fair amount for this, so in return, they should be covered for basic contingencies like a couple of slot covers to counter the bargain basement snap-off slot covers that you did to save you money. Otherwise, the graphics card slots are perfectly fine. They're not out of place or too far out of place anyway for a simple slot, but that can change with tolerance from case to case. Your mileage may vary. And lastly, cable management. It's actually quite good with respect to the amount of space available behind the motherboard tray. You can actually fit a 14mm double thickness 2.5-inch drive in and easily squeeze the side panel on. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that sort of form factor of drive here, since they tend to be hard disk drives, not SSDs, and then that generally means that they may have a breathing hole they require on the face, which if you only leave like a millimeter of space between that and the contact of the side panel, it's just a good idea to leave them more room so they can regulate their pressure properly, or whatever that hole is used for. I think it's pressure. Anyway, what lets this case down is again related to cost. You don't get rubber grommets over the cable management holes, which makes the case feel less presentable, and if you're paying this much, that's very likely a preference. If you don't care about grommets or looks in general, there are a lot of options at half this price, and that's where my head is at. So why would you buy this if you don't care about how your case looks at all? That guy in the comments, you can ridicule them. On top of that, paying this much, they only provide zip ties for managing your cables, when at this price point, Velcro straps are more the standard for a lot of cases at this price point. Anyway, that's the overview out of the way. That's how everything looks, works, and feels. Now let's cover the hard facts, thermal and acoustic performance, because you can't have one without the other. And if you see any graphs from anyone where they are showing one and they're not mentioning or showing the other, be skeptical. To give you a quick idea of the testing setups involved, I've tested the case with its fans in their default positions at full speed to see what their maximum noise levels and cooling potential is. We'll compare that setup with other cases in just a moment. It's worth noting the CPU coolers and GPU coolers fans were fixed throughout the testing, so any changes in performance will be due to the case's fans changing, not the components fans varying their parameters mid-test. There are no fan curves involved in any of my testing, nor should there be. Normally at this point I'd reduce the case fan speed to meet my noise limited testing of 37.5 dBA at 40 centimeters from the front of the case at a 45-degree angle. But unfortunately for me, the noise output of the fans at full speed was 37 dBA, which is pretty damn quiet, 5 dBA short of my target. So I had no choice but to replace the fans with the test fans, which I will swap in for issues like this, which are 3 1500 RPM Noctua NFF12s, which handily reached 37.5 dBA at 1135 RPM, which isn't much more than the stock fans, but they might be shifting more air relatively, and we only need an extra 0.5 dBA anyway, so there wouldn't be much change regardless. I've also tested the side intake and the front intake specifically as intakes, since there are filters involved, so it must be intended as an intake by the manufacturer, and I'll comply with that philosophy. So with both setups running at the same noise output or noise normalized, the results are actually very interesting. 2 front intakes and a rear exhaust net you a hotter GPU for a cooler CPU, and vice versa for the 2 side intakes to the rear exhaust. I imagine the airflow hitting the glass is distributing more of the airflow from the top fan down to the GPU area, but that's just pure speculation. I really don't have any idea. The results speak for themselves though. So let's compare it to other cases, and it's not a great start. So the stock setup at full speed yields poor results. Now, it's worth noting that in the realm of this testing setup or test system, it hasn't performed atrociously since it didn't crash the system, tipping the CPU over 99 degrees, which is the only failure state of this test system, unless the GPU's never gotten that far that it starts artifacting. Since the stock fans of all the cases here are running at full speed, they're all outputting different noise levels. In the same order as the thermals, the AX90 is one of the quietest cases of the bunch, so at least it's not hot and loud. And the AX90 case fans run on average at just under 1100 RPM, or at least they did for me. Moving on to the more important stuff, the noise normalized testing. The AX90 did all right here. It's equivalent to a not very good full mesh fronted TD500 mesh or the O11 dynamic, handily better than the P10C, the Antec P10C by a long shot, or the Johnsbow D40, which had the same set of fans, but not quite as good as something like the Lee & Lancool 215, which I would argue is a very competitive case regarding size and cost to this one, and the specs. Yeah, I would look at that one if you're worried about this one at all. Anyway, shifting into the calculated final scores for build quality, installation ease, compatibility, and thermals. The thermal score sits at about 60%. That's for the combined stock full speed and normalized testing. There's a crap load of maths that eventually spits out the score that's normalized between highest and lowest temperatures, and then the whole pack is normalized between the best at 100%. So this is what it comes up with. With that in mind, the AX90 is fine, and my socks are still firmly on. Onto the build quality, the AX90 scores poorly. The thin packaging and damage didn't help, and because I'm such a pleb, I've run out of time to return it, so someone's gonna get a great deal on eBay. Just a lot off for a small crack. There we go. The panels are fine, they're good, the paint is fine, but the nail in the coffin are the filters, which are mostly shocking. So yeah, just shy of 42% there. Installation ease scoring is fine in this case, actually good overall at 75%. There's a lot that goes into the scoring for this, all based on a predefined matrix to keep the field nice and level and even. The drawback are the access panels. The front in particular requires nothing but brute force to remove it. In fact, a lot of brute force to remove it. The filters aren't that accessible, but the GPU section is a bit of a mess with snap-off PCI Express covers, and for a case at this price, that's not meeting the standards set by others, and also related to that, there aren't any cable management grommets or Velcro straps or even twist ties included, so there we go. On a side note related to cable management, I typically recommend getting a 10mm Velcro strap for like 3 meter long one, just for life in general, and use some for your system if you want to, but I always expect to see something from the manufacturer. As for the compatibility scoring or specification scoring, if you will, there are a couple of things to discuss. I've split this into 2 interpretations after an overhaul of how compatibility is understood in my graphs. The first is the breakdown, which shows you how each component stacks up relative to the other cases based on the amount of space each component takes up in the case. Actual volume size here compared to the volume of the case. So the score is based on the volume of each component in the case that's then normalized. So it's relative, not an exact figure. You can see here that the AX90 does quite well in this regard, which with a lot of space for PCI Express cards, fans and radiators. The score isn't based on this though. It's actually based on how much of the case is actually filled with the volume of these components. When everything's installed, when you've got as much as you can in, that's the score, and then we've got a bonus score for any fans included that has been heavily nerfed from the previous scoring in this way. So yeah, if you've got a 200mm great quality ARGB fan, then it's not going to be scoring anywhere near as much as it did in my previous graphs. Anyway, the AX90 has an okay volume efficiency of 54%, and with the included fans it's being bumped up to a score of 66%, which is good. For context, I've added the best and worst cases regarding space efficiency to this list. The Cooler Master NR200P is a monster in efficiency, and the InWin WinBot is just a monster. So overall, all scores combined, the AX90 does quite poorly in this list. Now, this is considering all scoring categories as equal. That might not be your opinion of cases in general, and it's probably not. If you don't care about build quality at all, then this case is probably more competitive, and that's its Achilles heel in the scoring department. But it's not that bad. Nobody's getting injured by this case unless they're trying to open the front too close to a wall. Including bonus or penalty points for really special features, the AX90 having nothing of in either camp, it's at a final score of 57%, which is fine to good. However, a couple of extra bonus charts I like to add in starts with the price chart, where the AX90 isn't exactly cheap at around $100, and mixing this with the score, the AX90 is in the lower third of the graph, which isn't great. So price versus performance, this isn't the best case. If you were looking for something competitive to take a look at, I'd particularly look at the Lee & Lancool 215. That's cheaper and performs a lot better. You can take a look at anything else, but I'm personally very fond of the NZXT H510 Flow, which performed extremely well, although it's a little bit more pricey, and it's about the same price as the AX90. So Lee, slightly cheaper, NZXT, same price. I really like it, or this. It's up to you entirely. So there we go. I'm certainly not saying don't buy this case. That's not just because if I say that, I'll have to deal with existing owners of the case defending it, but it's because I don't think it's bad. It's just not amazing, but it might very well be the look you're going for, or something that is available to you. Everything else isn't. Or it's on sale and it has a pile of fans that are ARGB and quiet, and you're not going to be putting the most powerful system in there. If I use this case long term, I'd probably remove the front and internal filter and just deal with a bit of extra dust. That would keep my system cooler and allow me to throw in more powerful components down the line without being too concerned. So there we go. Thank you so much for checking this one out. Apologies for everyone who's been waiting for videos. I've been swamped with work lately, so I've just been sort of plugging away in the background. I did a huge amount of revamping of my graphs, all sort of nonsense to try and make the statistics I bring to the video more accurate, more interesting, more relative to real life, and not just some sort of nebulous thing. So I'm really proud with the liter component to liter case volume scoring, which is great. I also did an interesting overhaul of how the thermal graphs work as well, so I hope you appreciate that stuff. They don't look quite right. I understand this. I need to work on how they look, but I'm halfway there. People you see scrolling by now, not Patreon now. I've closed Patreon, at least temporarily, if not permanently. I didn't feel that I was doing enough for the channel, let alone people providing me, giving me money for either extra stuff or just generally, so I've put that at least on hold for now. People you see scrolling by now are actually people from Discord, so if you want your name there, if you want to come say hi, if you want to give me suggestions or help out with ideas and stuff or whatever, then yeah, join Discord. And yeah, I'll see if I can efficiently extract names from Discord and throw them in here. If not, it's going to be manual, which I may give up on in the future, but there we go. Next case I'm going to be reviewing is the Raidmax X603. I got in touch with Raidmax and they were like, heck yeah, let's send you something over. Don't think they realized I was in the UK, so they had to ship it from America. So didn't realize Raidmax wasn't really around much in the UK or Europe. So there we go. Anyway, huge thanks to them. Huge thanks to you guys for sticking with this one. Long one, I know, and I'm going to be doing my absolute best to make these shorter because I can't keep up. I can't keep doing one video a month stuff, because that's just never going to work, is it? So anyway, thanks so much for checking this one out. Sorry for... Oh, dearie me. These gone for way too long. Thanks, guys. Catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.